Hey Guitar Heroes, this is Mel from How to Play Guitars with an S.com and unleash your inner guitar hero, available on school right now, SKOOL.com/unleash your inner guitar hero. Have you ever opened up a chord book and you just were overwhelmed with all the choices that you could find? Like, for example, like this, and you were just like, I don't even know what to do with all of that. Like, I don't even know if I need all those chords. I'm just trying to learn a few chords so I can learn some of my favorite songs. Well, stay tuned for today's lesson because we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about how to take some simple chords that you know based on the caged method, C, A, G, E, and D. And we're going to talk about how to take those simple chords and move some notes around to get all kinds of chords. So the next time you see a sus4 or a sus2 or an add9 or a 7, you're going to know what it is and how to play it without having to search through a chord book to find it. So stay tuned if that sounds like something interesting to you, and we'll talk soon. Okay, so does this sound familiar? So you're learning this song, and all of a sudden you come across this chord, and it's like C sus4 or C add9. You're like, I don't even know what this is. How do I do this? And then you're like, oh, that's right, I have a chord book. So you open up the chord book and you look for the C's, and you're like, okay, I don't see the chord I'm looking for right now. Now what do I do? And you get online, you look up some options, and there's like 10 different options of how to play this chord. It can be really confusing and really overwhelming rather quickly. Well, today I'm gonna try to alleviate that problem for you by just showing you a simple method that takes chords that you already know, moving fingers around and creating new chords out of them. And we'll even take some familiar chord shapes that we know and move them up and down the neck, sometimes utilizing open strings. So at the beginning, you won't even have to worry about bar chords. Now, I know what you're thinking. There's always going to be a song with a bar chord, and that's true. And I have a solution for you in my group on school, SKOOL.com/unleash your inner guitar hero. I have an ebook that I wrote called the F Chord Manifesto, and it's all about mastering bar chords. So if that's an issue for you, I have that in my classroom. Also, there's a beginning guitar workshop that I've done in the past that I'm going to maybe redo. And there's an intermediate guitar workshop also that I want to do here in the near future, where we're going to cover a lot of the topics that we're talking about today, but in more depth. In the first course, we talk about some basic music theory and how to understand some of these chords better and how to put them together to make some familiar chord progressions and songs that you really want to know how to play. And the intermediate course will take some of those chords and the cage method specifically and show you how to take them up and down the neck in varieties of bar chords and other kinds of configurations on the neck. So you basically have an unlimited chord vocabulary just with the knowledge from those two workshops in today's video. So if that all sounds interesting to you at all, go check out my group on school, SKOOL.com/unleash your inner guitar hero, and stay tuned for this video, and we're gonna dig in right now. Okay, so you probably know a basic C chord, and if you don't, by the way, in my group on school, SKOOL.com/unleash your inner guitar hero, I have a beginner guitar course that's gonna take you through a method whereby you learn 1-finger chords, 2-finger chords, 3-finger chords, 4-finger chords, and so forth to finally learn some of these chords we're going to do today. So I encourage you to go do that right now and before you go any further, because we're going to talk about some chords and you need to know what these chords are. So the very first chord we're going to talk about is a C chord. Now, if you've seen the C chord before, great. And if you're comfortable with it, even better. Because what we're going to do is we're going to show how this is based off a C major scale. And again, I talk about this in my beginner workshop that's available there in my school classroom. And I'm going to actually redo it here probably in a few months. Come check that out. So here's the C chord. And we're going to start with a C major scale. We're going to go C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, C, B, A, G, F, E, D, C. I highly encourage you to do that. If you don't know the notes on the neck, I encourage you to go back and watch the video where I actually show you how to learn all the notes on the neck with a chromatic exercise, the ultimate chromatic scale exercise. And that's a good place to start if you're not familiar with some of these notes. Now, after you've play the C chord and you can play that scale a little bit, doesn't have to be perfect. The next thing to understand, though, is that each one of those notes has a number. So C is 1, D is 2, E is 3, F is 4, G is 5, A is 6, B is 7, and C is 8. And I can even go further. D is 9, E, the following E is 10, F is 11, G is 12. Now that's helpful because if you're trying to learn a chord, like let's say you're learning a song and it says C add 9, well, here is the root C, here's the octave C, that's number 8. The 9th note in the scale is actually this D right here. So if I want to do a C add 9, I add that 9th note in there with my pinky, and there is a C add 9. Now I'm going to go back to the regular C, and if I needed a C major 7, I would just take the first finger off, and that's a C major 7, and back to the C. Now this might sound familiar to you because there's a song called Dust in the Wind that uses this arrangement of the chords. There's lots of other songs that do that as well. And so I'd encourage you to play around with that. You might have already thought of some songs while you heard me do that. And the other thing is, so sometimes we get the C add 9, but other times you might see what's called a C sus2. What's the difference between a C sus2 and a C add 9? In fact, you may not even know there's a similarity or a difference between those two chords. They sound a lot different. Well, in that scale, C was 1 and D was 2. Remember, the add 9, though, is also a D. It's just a higher octave D. Octave meaning 8 notes. From C to C is 1 octave. So that higher note was a D, but that's the 9th note in the scale. Well, the second note in the scale is this D string right here, or D note on the D string. And this is our second, 1, 2. That's our second scale degree in the key of C. So if I want a C sus2, I'm going to go back to the C chord, and I'm going to take off the third. C, D, E, there's my third. Take the third out, go to the second, and then put the other fingers back. That's a C sus2. And very often you'll hear people sort of hammering that on and moving that back and forth like that. Well, that's a sus2. There's the regular C. And if I want to add the pinky to the 3rd fret on the D string, this is a C sus4. Back to the regular C. And so I might come up with a song or a riff or something that right, it might move that around, and that could be all kinds of songs, right? So the C sus4 and the C sus2 is essentially replacing that E, the 3rd C, D, E, with either a 2nd or a 4th. But if I add a note higher up in this case, the 9th, if I have that basic C formation still there, not really moving a finger, but adding the pinky on the 3rd fret, that's a C add 9. Okay? So, and again, the difference is the octave, 9 versus the 2. All right? But the sus always replaces the 3rd with either the 2nd or the 4th. That's what sus means. It means suspended. Now, if I had a C sus4 and I included the high E string up here, then actually that's an add 4 because I've left the E just in the higher octave. But if I go back to this, just the C sus4 without the E in there, that's a sus4. Sus4, add 4. Back to the root, back to the chord, okay? And so now I can do other things to this chord. For example, instead of playing the C major 7, I can lower that B down 1/2 step to a B flat, put the C back on the 1st fret of the B string. Now I have what's called a C7, also known as a dominant chord. Now the C7 is the 5 chord in the key of F. So if I now want to go to an F chord, I just go here, and I have an F chord. Now this is a mini F chord. You can certainly play the full F chord, bar chord, but today I don't want to deal so much with the bar chords as I do just with mostly open chords, or chords in the 1st position anyway. Now you can, sometimes that's very hard for students to bar the top 2 notes, so then I tell them they can play at what's called an F major 7 by just taking that F and lowering it down to E. That's an F major 7. okay? And then here's a F6 by adding the pinky to the 3rd fret on the B string. With the F chord, it's a 6 because you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The 6th note in this scale. 7th is the E, and then F is the octave. And if I want to add 9, I just add the pinky to the 3rd fret on the high E string, and that's an F add 9. And now I'm playing melodies with my chords and really not moving the fingers very much. And that starts to get me into the whole realm of playing like a chord melody style, which I do that all the time, and it's really helpful to learn how to do that, because then you can be your own accompanist and you can just play your own chords and play melodies at the same time. So that's the beginning about how to do that a little bit. But so I had that F, F major 7, F6. Let's go back to the C. And we said that we had C major 7. Well, where's the 6? Well, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The A is the 6th of that chord. And so I'm going to take that C chord and add the 6 by just laying my 2nd finger down flat. Back to the regular C. And so I can do this. And you hear that in a lot of folk music and early old time music. Again, I can create these little riffs with these chords just by moving those notes around, you know, and in particular on the G string, G, A, B flat. So I'm at from a C to a C6 to a C7, right? Right? So just by moving those fingers around, you can create all kinds of chords, and they sound cool. And even if you don't necessarily know all the theory behind it, you can still just move some fingers around and create new chords that way. All right, so I had a 6 and I had the 7 there. Now that 6 reminds me a lot of this A minor chord, which is related to C, but just with the C on the 3rd fret of the A string, which is what they call like a C first inversion, just meaning, or actually it's an A minor first inversion, which is an A minor chord with a C in the bass. Okay, and so now I have some chords that I could put together to make a song. I have a C to F, right? F major 7, right? Back to C. And then I could go to A minor, right? Right? And kind of play around with some of these ideas. Now, similarly, if I do the A minor and I take the 1st finger off, so replace the 3rd, the C, so A, B, C, with the 2nd, sus2, sus4. And again, this is in Dust in the Wind, like we had talked about before. So already you can see that we've already learned a bunch of songs, or started to learn a bunch of songs, just by moving some of these notes around in the chords. Now when I go from the C to the F, usually in a C major context, the next chord is the G. But I'm going to go back to that C real quick before I do this, and I'm going to add that add 9, but I'm going to show you another way to play it. Now if I do a G like this, 4-finger G, by the way, a lot of this is in my beginner course on School, skol.com/unleash your inner guitar hero. This is a 4-finger G, and to get a C add 9, I just take these 2 fingers and go down, and that's a C add 9, right? And I can do a lot of cool chords like E minor 7 and B sus4, right? Just by moving those fingers around. Now, if I go to I'm going to go back to the G chord real quick. I can add the 2nd note on the G string 2nd fret, and that makes that a G add 2. All right, or a G add 9. Really an add 9 because that's on the higher octave. But very often, chord charts will say G2 because the 2s and the 9s, to some people, are interchangeable. All right, and there's that G again. Now, if I want to make it a sus4, couple different ways I can do that. I can raise this B note, the third G, A, B to the fourth. So this is a G sus4 to regular G. Take the first finger off, it's a sus2, and then back to the regular G. Now now again, that sus2 is that A note, which is the lower octave, and the higher one is the 9 up here, that's why that's a add 9. But I can also use the G chord like this, and then do G sus4 by adding the first finger on the B string, and then back to the regular G. And I can add the sus4 and the 2, and that's kind of a cool sound. It's almost reminiscent of almost like a little bit of an F chord, right? You could say F chord with G in the bass as an example of that, or even more so if I put the pinky on the 3rd fret of the D string and add the 2nd fret on the G and then the 1st on the B. That is an F chord with G in the bass, or F/G, which is a kind of a cool sound. It's kind of a jazzy or almost a fusion-ish kind of chord. And you'll find chords in like that in all kinds of music, everything from Pat Metheny to Joni Mitchell and all kinds of stuff. But all right, so that's another example of what I can do with some of these chords. And I can still play melodies too. And I can add the 6th here on the D string, because it's root, 3rd, 5th, 6th. So remember that sound? And then there's the 7th right there as well. Speaking of the 7th typically in a G7 chord most commonly is played up here on the 1st fret of the high E string. And I'm going to show you something real quick about the 7ths. Now I've got this G major 7, 2nd fret on the F sharp, and then I go to G7, put the first finger on the 1st fret of the high E string. So I have G major 7, G7, back to C. Now in my beginner course, I show people how to do these chords with just one finger at a time. In my beginner guitar workshop, I explain the theory behind what makes these chords what they are. All right, but just by moving some fingers around, I can get some really cool sounding chords. Now I have C to the F. Some of those fingers around, I have some really cool sounds. So I'm not just playing just stock C, F, and G as an example, right? And you can do this with all kinds of chords. Like for example, if I had that D chord, D sus4 by adding the pinky to the 3rd fret, regular D, D sus2, regular D. But I could also make this a major D major 7 just by laying that first finger flat on the top 3 strings. D major 7, regular D, D major 7, D7, D6, okay? Back to that D. Now I can do something similar with the A chord. I have A sus4, pinky 3rd fret on the B, back to regular A sus2, regular A. Now A sus2 has the open B string. And then I can also do A major or A chord, A major 7 with the first finger on the G string, 1st fret, A7 with an open G string, or up here, okay, back to the D. Now that A, I could do A7, but I could also do an A6 here, just by adding the 2nd fret on the high E string, that F sharp, because I've got A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, really, in the key of A, it's a sharp. And so that's an F sharp, that's a 6th note in that chord, so I have an A6. And that's actually used in Cranberry song, okay, Linger. And And so anyway, so I can move these chords around and move some of the notes around in the chords and get all kinds of cool sounds. Now, on that E chord, I've got this E major chord. And now E minor is just by taking that first finger off, right? But I can also do E sus4 by replacing the third with the second fret on the G string. And that's a very common sound. Now, sus2 is not as easy to do on this particular shape, but I can do an add to by adding the fourth fret on the D string with a pinky. It's a little bit of a challenging fingering, but it's a great sound. And I'm going to go back to that E, and I'm going to put the F sharp here and make it a 9, E add 9. Ooh, it's almost like an E7 sharp 9. Here, if I take the third finger off, that's an E7. Now, Jimi Hendrix even used this in Purple Haze, and then it can put that pinky up on the third or the fourth fret to make it an E major chord. 9, 7 on the third fret of the B, 6 to 1, 4, sus4, and then I have the add 9 or add 2. Okay, again, just by moving some fingers around on some of those open chords. Now, one other thing you can often do is you can take a chord that you already know, like a C chord, and take it up a couple frets. This gives us a D add 4. Because D, E, F, G is the fourth note, and so we've got a D add 4, add 9 with the open E. I didn't even have to move any fingers. All I had to do is take that chord up 2 frets and have an add 4 and an add 9 if I wanted. And this is like Man in the Moon by REM. Okay, and just by moving that chord around, you can get some really cool sounds. Similarly, if I take the D chord and I move it up 2 frets, I get the E. If I put the D in the bass, it's like an E7 with D in the bass. That actually reminds me of a song called Wholehearted by Extreme. Right? Here's G with the D in the bass. It sounds great. And then an A with the D in the bass is like an A add 4. Right? This is also in Give a Little Bit. And also, Supertramp, Give a Little Bit, and also the Led Zeppelin song Over the Hills and Far Away. Right? So you can just move some of these chords around. Now, sometimes the chord, if you move it around, won't sound great. I mean, that's actually not too bad. That's an E flat major 7 with D in the bass, E with D in the bass, E7, F, which is an F add 6 or F6, D in the bass, F sharp with the D. I don't know, that's a little bit strange. That's like a sharp 5 on that one. G, A flat with the D, which would be like a sharp 11 or a sharp 4. A puts the add 4 on the D. It's a B flat chord, which is the D is the third of the chord. It's perfect. And not on B major so much. No, that doesn't sound so great unless I make that a B minor. Now that sounds pretty good, just by moving that one note around. Okay. C with D in the bass, C add 9. Okay, this is a C sharp with D in the bass. That doesn't sound as good, but there's your D. Okay, so just by moving some of those chords around, you can get some cool chords. And similarly, you can do that also with a G chord. Now, this doesn't always work super great, but because it's a key of G, it can do G, C to D, and then, right? It's kind of a C and then a D, add 4, and add 6. Okay, and I'm just thinking intervals. I'm just thinking the notes and the chords. Again, we'll talk more about that in my beginner and intermediate workshops that are going to be available on school, skool.com/unleash your inner guitar hero. Check them out there. And one more chord. If I take the E chord and move it up and down, and again, at this point, we're not even necessarily talking about bar chords. These can become bar chords. We'll learn about that in the cage method again in the intermediate workshop. But if I take this E chord and move it up, that's like an F with E in the bass, F major 7. Very Spanish sounding. G6 with the E in the bass. Kind of like a Phrygian dominant kind of piece. Ooh, A major with E in the bass. Very beautiful. Let's be an A at 9. And a B with E in the bass. Would be an add 4. C with the E in the bass. C major 7 with the B also. D, D6, D9, D6, 9 with E in the bass, right? And then back to E, right? So just by moving some. These kinds of chords were really popular like in the folk explosion in the 60s and the 70s. And because you can just take some simple shapes and move them around, even some of the early worship tunes and very early Christian worship music, Rich Mullins era kind of thing, Keith Green, they would use these kinds of chords because they're really easy to play. And then it's just a matter of learning how to leave these fingers there and put your finger down to play a bar chord. But we'll talk about that in another video, and we'll talk about that also in my group on School, skool.com/unleash your inner guitar hero. Check that out there. I hope this was informative for you. I hope you learned some new chords. For those that are in the 5-day challenge right now on School, I want you guys to pick 1, 2, or 3 of these chords, or find a chord that you really like based on some of these concepts, and either go write a song or learn a song that has these chords in it. And you can play, you can learn some of the songs that I talked about in this video. And if you want more examples, you can come visit me there at School, skool.com/unleash your inner guitar hero, where I'll certainly have a conversation with you. I do at least 2 live calls a week, and we get on there and we talk about music and life and guitar and all the kinds of fun stuff that we're dealing with daily. And so come check it out, and I will see you there. Until next time, keep jamming and have some fun with these chords, and I'll see you then.